Today, we are excited to be joined by Dr. Shehnaz Haqqani. Shehnaz has a PhD in Islamic Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. She specializes in gender and religion, the academic study of religion, and female authority in Islam. She is an active blogger. Check her blog called Freedom from the Forbidden at orbella.net. Welcome, Shehnaz.
Thank you, Nabeela. Thank you for talking to me about Islamic feminism.
So why do you think we need Islamic feminism?
That's a really important question. Now, before I define Islamic feminism in a moment, I want to first create a parallel between Islamic feminism, Islamic feminism and other movements, other social justice movements. Muslims agree, and I would hope that objectively and without any exception, all Muslims agree that slavery was bad and that it is bad, and we're grateful and it's great that it's now ended. When it comes to social injustices like slavery, we think of injustices or the efforts towards eradicating injustices as a process. We think of them as, well, the Prophet ﷺ started a movement against something like slavery, and finally we got to a point where officially, not necessarily definitely, officially it has now been abolished. And I wish that we would think of something like gender injustices in similar ways, where the Prophet ﷺ brings about this revolution for women's rights and what now would be feminism in the 7th century. But he didn't necessarily start and then stop it right there. It didn't begin and end with him in his lifetime. He started it, and it's our obligation, it's our duty as Muslims to continue that effort, so that women's rights in Islam remain revolutionary in the same way that they were in the 7th century when he first brought them out in the 7th in his time. So I think of the.
Are you saying it's like an evolution that still is taking place?
Absolutely, that it is that women's rights, just like all human rights, including other forms of social justices, such as I mentioned, slavery, they were not intended to stop there, to start there and stop there. They were intended to continue on, and I genuinely believe this was the idea, that it was we carry the ideas that the Prophet planted in his time, and we take them up in ways that make sense to us in our context and in our time, in any different time period. I hear these things from Muslims all the time that that something like slavery was supposed to be eradicated over the course of time because the Quran or Islam does not explicitly abolish it. And it's always interesting to me as a Muslim woman, as a feminist, as somebody deeply invested in both, in all kinds of injustices, in eradicating them. And I just don't hear that same argument from them when it comes to gender injustices. They say instead things like, well, the Prophet ﷺ gave us these rights and that's it. Islam gave us these rights and that's it. And I'm thinking, no, that was just the beginning of the process of getting us rights to eventually have everything that we can possibly have to be for a fair and just society.
So what is Islamic feminism? I know that it just evokes so many different emotions for people around the world. So can you define it for us?
It has so many different definitions, and I'm sure that depending on which feminist you ask, you're going to get different answers. But for me, certainly, it's a movement that challenges patriarchal interpretations of Islam, meaning that ideas of interpretations of Islam that support misogyny or patriarchy or gendered violence. And so Islamic feminism becomes a movement to challenge those ideas, and it is inherently rooted in the belief that equality and justice, especially gender, but otherwise as well, at the core of Islam, that gender justices are at the core of Islam, that Islam thrives on in it, and that it is necessarily supportive of gender justices and of gender equality. And Muslim feminists argue that our biases and experiences, what is called baggage, basically, is read into the Quran, and these personal meaning that the personal makes it into the Quran, even when the Quran is not explicitly or in its language is not saying something. We think it is sometimes consciously and sometimes subconsciously to get out of the Quran that it is what we want from it.
I understand that you said that this is something that needs to evolve. So, but when I think about Islamic feminism, I always think, oh, it's a recent phenomenon. So when would you say Islamic feminism started?
That depends on who you ask also. And I think with all of this, with this whole conversation, a lot of the answers would depend, and they may vary from person to person, and I totally recognize that. When I was doing my PhD research for in grad school a few years ago on questions of gender and social and change in Islam, when I would ask my participants these are Muslims, Sunni Muslims in Austin, if the Prophet ﷺ, in their opinion, was a feminist, most of them said yes. But the same people, if I asked them if they identify as feminist, they said no. It was just interesting conversation, and I have stuff to say on it in my dissertation. In his time, we didn't have the word feminism, but we did have the movement. We did have this idea. We recognized that gender injustices were a thing. And so feminism has always been there as this movement to eradicate gendered injustices, but the term itself is new. So I do believe that there are things that the Prophet ﷺ did, and his wives certainly as well, that would be identified as feminist. Some of their actions are feminist, some of their teachings and messages are feminist. But more in terms of scholarship and in terms of the study of Islamic feminism, it is certainly much more recent. Islamic feminism, and certainly for me, is actually a bridge between the claim that Islam gave us all the rights we could possibly want for the rest of eternity, and the reality of Muslim women's lives. I think we can agree that there are too many Muslim women who do not know what their rights are, who don't know that they have these wonderful rights that are, and some of them are very basic human rights that are denied to them around the world and also in the US. And so Islamic feminism becomes this bridge for us to say, okay, here's the theory, but here's a practice. What can we do to make the theory that Islam gave us all the rights a reality for women as well?
So then are you suggesting the interpretation of the Quran are based on perspectives of the scholars that are being interpreted? Because I don't understand how you can take the two when you're saying it's a process for justice, and other scholars saying this is the interpretation, this is the final interpretation, this is the tafsir. How would you combine the two to make sense for people of today?
Yes, absolutely. The Quran is read by humans who are coming with specific biases, with specific experiences, with specific goals, and a specific worldview, right? So, and everyone doesn't have the same worldview. We don't have the same experiences. So it might be possible for someone who's not affected by a particular interpretation, especially if that interpretation is violent, to read the Quran in a way that's, well, this is what the Quran says. But for someone who is affected by or impacted deeply by that interpretation, they might say, I don't think this is what God meant, and I don't think this is what God is saying. But certainly, I mean, all the research tells us, not just for the Quran or for any other scriptures, but when we're reading anything, when we're reading any, especially literary work, and this goes for poetry as well, people have their own interpretations of it. The Quran is no exception. And we have very, very specific, and there's many, many examples of this. One of my favorite ones is the creation of Adam and Eve in the Quran. When the earlier scholars were reading this, when they're reading the creation story in the Quran, the tafsir tells us that it was all Eve's fault, that humans are now back, the humans are on Earth, that the fall of humanity is Eve's fault, and it rarely blames Adam, for example. But it was feminists who made this discovery that actually Eve is not at all blamed in the Quran. That it was that either Adam is explicitly blamed, or the two of them are blamed together, or Satan is blamed, right? But it took feminists to make this argument, and it's a very recent, we're talking 19th, 20th century argument, finding or discovery, which tells us two important things. One of which is the sources of the tafsir. Yes, hadith are an important source of the tafsir, of the exegesis of the scholars when they're interpreting the Quran. But another one is also very, very clearly the Bible and biblical sources, right? The biblical tradition ends up being this important source for how to read the Quran.
So why do you think we need Islamic feminism?
So we need Islamic feminism precisely because there's a lack of understanding of women's rights in Islam. Muslim women, as I said, themselves don't know many of these rights. Muslim men don't know a lot of these rights. Muslim male scholars that I know often dismiss women's questions in ways that are very, very harmful to us. They leave some kind of a psychological or emotional or sometimes even physical impact on us when we ask questions and they're not taken seriously. That is an example of how patriarchy works. So, or questions are mocked, or you're asking about, you're interested in, I don't know, the example of the hur comes up, for example. What does the Quran say? What do women get when we die? What do we get in heaven, right? And I've seen Muslim male scholars completely dismissing that question and attacking us and saying, you're being modern, you're being a modern woman, and you're denying the Quran and all these things. But we're asking a very valid, very real question, because the reality of it is that it has been used against us, right? We've been told, haha, you don't get anything, but a man gets everything, and if you're not a good wife, then he gets this and that in heaven. So so part of it is our questions aren't taken seriously, our experiences aren't taken seriously. The impact of the existing translations and interpretations of the Quran that we have isn't taken seriously. And I think that we need to take it seriously so that we can have, again, generally a better, more just, fair, more compassionate society, humanity. And one thing that can make that happen is a more acknowledgement of the reality of Islamic feminism, of the impact of Islamic feminism. It is Muslim feminists who are doing all this work to point out these things, and they're not getting much credit for it. That there are alternatives, and that alternatives are being created by Islamic feminism, by Islamic feminists, through more scholarship and more critical engagements with the Quran and with Sharia and with Islam.
Thank you so much for those takeaways. It's really good to know that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was cultivating an environment that was encouraging feminism, and that is something that needs to evolve, and we see that as a part of Islam. It's instrumental. Thank you, Shehnaz, for joining us today. Make sure that you follow our series and follow us at Facebook. Just look us up. It's Feminist Fitna, and join our conversation. In our next video, Dr. Haqqani will answer specific questions you have. Please message us your questions, and inshallah we will answer them. Take care, and assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Nabeela. Wa alaikum assalam.